Jesus and his 12 apostles and maybe a number of supportive women, people like Mary Magdalene. So a relatively kind of modest and tight-knit group, maybe 15 or 16 or so people. But it appears from this passage that by this stage, there was something more approaching a small hamlet on the move around that region. Perhaps as many as 100 disciples traveling with him on his journey. And provided they had a good supply of cash, I dare say that local people would have welcomed them with open arms because of the business that they would have brought to their village. It was a bit like a small convention arriving in your town. The problem was that Jesus and his followers weren't rich. They didn't have a lot of money. So how would the small towns and villages have responded to their arrival, the arrival of 100 people or so looking for free board and lodgings? Now, with this now larger group, Jesus proposed a new strategy to send out 72 disciples, as he says, 2 by 2 ahead of him, went to every town and place where he was about to go. And there may have been a practical dimension to this strategy, this plan that he made, simply to ensure that all of them would get board and lodgings provided. It reminded me a little bit of the story of The Hobbit. Don't know how many of you here are excited about the third Hobbit movie about to be released in our cinemas. You have to go back to the first Hobbit movie when the little hobbit Bilbo is having a quiet evening at home when a knock on the door comes. And it turns out to be a dwarf. It's just what you expect to turn up on your doorstep, at least in Middle-earth. Now, there are actually 12 dwarves, and I suspect if the 12 dwarves had all arrived at the same time, Bilbo would have just told them to get lost, because there was no way he was going to accommodate and feed 12 dwarves. But they come in ones and twos. And so by the end of the evening, he has these 12 dwarves there. They've all eaten all of his food, and they've stayed overnight with him in his home. And that wouldn't have been his plan had they come together. And so maybe similarly, Jesus with the 72, sending them 2 by 2, kind of little group after little group, turning up in the village or town that they were going to, would all gradually be accommodated. And then he and his apostles would arrive. And so maybe there was a practical purpose for this strategy that Jesus developed. But maybe, and really probably the main intended purpose was a spiritual one. It's a strategy for mission. For Jesus utters early on in the account his iconic missional strapline. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And that's just what he's doing here in this passage. He's sending out workers into the harvest field, that field which they are approaching. The towns and villages of Galilee and of Samaria and Judea. And the group with him might have thought to themselves, well, who are these workers that God is going to send into the harvest fields? Perhaps we should ask the Lord to send those people. But then Jesus goes on. And he says, go, I am sending you. And we might think to ourselves, just in case Jesus decides to say that to us, well, I'm not very good at mission. I don't know what to say. I'm not very bold, Lord. But I suspect that the Lord is saying to us through this passage as well, go, I'm sending you. We are the workers. Just as the 72 then were the workers he was sending, we are the workers that God is sending out into the harvest fields. The 72 are told not to spend a lot of time preparing or getting provisions together. They were not even to take a purse or a bag or sandals They were to depart just as the 12 had done previously, in complete dependence on God. And that really is what God is saying to us too. Don't worry about all the preparations. Don't feel that you have to be ready to go. Just go, because I'm sending you. They were not to greet anyone on the road, Jesus tells them. That seemed a bit strange to me, because surely that would be a mission opportunity. If you met somebody in the road, maybe that's the person that you're supposed to lead to faith in Christ. The New Century Version, which is a slightly more up-to-date version than the NIV, translates the phrase this way. Jesus says, "Don't waste time talking with people on the road." And it's perhaps not that Jesus is encouraging rudeness, but warning against distractions from the primary goal. The sort of greetings that you would share on the road, we found this when we went to Uganda, it was very kind of complicated, accepted greetings that you would share with one another. That was the first thing that we were taught in the local language of Luganda. That was pretty much all we were taught, really, because we were only there for a few weeks. And there was these very formal greetings that you would share with somebody that you met in those circumstances. And these greetings tend to be on a fairly superficial level, whereas really Jesus' desire was for real relationships. Relationships that were going to last, relationships that were going to make a difference to people's lives. And of course, distractions is one of the main strategies that the enemy uses, one of the biggest hindrances to effective mission. And we get caught up in the busyness of life. And that busyness tends to take our focus off what's really important, what Jesus is really wanting us to do. Maybe that's one of the biggest problems at Christmas time. There's so many things to organize, so many things to do. We get distracted from really what the main message is. And it brought to my mind my wife's trips to Asda. When she goes to Asda maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, it takes forever. She has to leave a long period of time to go to Asda because she meets so many people she knows. And she has all these conversations in the aisle. And it's not been unknown for Karina to pray for people in the aisle, for people to break down in tears because they're sharing their life story with her. She gets into all these deep conversations with folks that she knows in Asda, and it takes forever. Sometimes she doesn't come back with all the stuff she went to buy. But actually, I think for her in that situation, in the sense, that's the mission, that's the ministry. The shopping really is the distraction. So maybe sometimes you should just go, Karina, without bothering with a list or with plans to get anything, and just wander around and minister to people. And hopefully you won't get chucked out. Well, once the 72 arrive at the town, Jesus says that they're to confer a blessing of peace. And not just on everybody willy-nilly, but on a particular person. And this person is called the person of peace. Look out for the people of peace and confer this blessing on them. And who are these people of peace? What will they look like? How will they speak to us? Well, back at Clan in May in Edinburgh, there was an all-age service. It was taken by the kids workers who came and led this all-age service. And they looked at this very issue of who is the person of peace. How can you identify the person of peace? And their suggestions were these. They said, these are the people who welcome you. These are the people who are interested in the life you live because you follow Jesus. It interests them. It captures their imagination. These are the people who are open to what you have to share about Jesus and how he's impacted your life. These are the people who want to serve you in some way, who want to contribute perhaps even financially to the work that you're doing. It may be that some of these people are what would be called gatekeepers. They're kind of leaders in the community, or they're people of influence in the community as well. Over the summer, we looked at a number of missionaries from the past. One of the people we looked at was David Livingstone, probably the best known historical Scottish missionary. And one of the significant things about David Livingstone, which is remarkable given the amount of time he spent in Africa and the people that he would have spoken to, is that he only saw one convert in his work out there in Africa. And this one convert was a man called Sekele, who was the chief of the Quena tribe in that region. That was his one convert, but it appeared that Sekele was a person of peace. He was also a gatekeeper. He was a man of influence because he was the head of his tribe. And over time, Sekele led the whole of his tribe to Christ. And he made it possible for other missionaries to come and be introduced to other local tribes. And it's been said of him that he had more impact on mission in Africa than anyone else. He was the person of peace. He was the gatekeeper for that community, maybe even for that continent. How do you find these people of peace? Do we go round the local doors asking for board and lodgings like the 72 did? We certainly have taken eggs around the doors around about Easter time. That's provided some positive conversations. Karina took penny gospels around our neighbours' doors around about the time of the Commonwealth Games in last year in the summer. I think we still have piles of them at the back, so if this is something you want to do, go and take a little gospel around your neighbours' doors at Christmas. We could eat with those who don't know Jesus. I did that in the early days of going to Lomos prison, going in the evenings and actually eating with the prisoners, some of whom had nothing to do with the chaplaincy at all, but that led to interesting conversations. We could walk instead of driving everywhere and meet the people that also walk around our local communities. In our area in Killamant, it's all the dog walkers. The only time I tend to walk is when I go to get my paper on a Sunday morning if it's not raining, and those are the people you tend to meet, is the people who are walking their dogs. You could start a hobby. Maybe there's something that you used to do you'd like to start doing again. You could start a hobby and do it with people who don't know Jesus. You could talk to the people you work with or the people you study with. You could go along to this breakfast that Jill is organizing and Graham are organizing to work out how most effectively you can connect with people you work with. We could serve our neighbors in some way, volunteer for some local community event or city event like the Commonwealth Games. That was a wonderful opportunity that we had earlier in the year. Jesus also says here something else that's quite interesting. He says, stay. Do not move around from house to house. And so he's encouraging us not to be butterflies, always moving on to the next friendship, relationship, experience, but rather commit ourselves long-term to people and to communities. Because in our bustling and busy lives, we can easily be moving on always to the next situation. And Jesus is saying we need to just slow down, invest time in the people that we know, the people of peace that we've come into contact with already. And so we ask ourselves that question, who might these people be? I think certainly for us in our home, in our neighborhood, it's definitely been our neighbors, Jean and Hamish. Hamish, some of you will know, was the caretaker in the church for quite some number of years. It's interesting, when we first turned up on their doorstep as their neighbors, Jean said to us, my family say that you're the best thing that could have ever happened to us, that they'd been praying for us all this time, because Jean's family are all Christians, and she described herself as the black sheep of the family. And actually, they are people of peace in the local community, particularly Hamish, who has very nobly just taken on the role of being the chair of the local neighborhood watch, which is a bit of a thankless task, but I think Hamish will do a fantastic job in that role. And we're going to be having our neighborhood watch party on Friday, which is a fantastic opportunity to get to know the people round about and to identify the person of peace. Jesus certainly encouraged the 72 to eat with these people, to offer healing to these people, to tell them about the kingdom of God. And we can certainly ask ourselves how we can spend more time with the people that we do come into contact with in our lives. How we can have real conversations with them. We could be praying for that. And perhaps offer to pray for them. It may surprise you how few people will actually reject an opportunity for prayer. And that certainly seems to be the most effective way of conferring blessing of peace on people is to pray for them. We finished the marriage course 7 weeks just this last Friday, the final session, looking at love in action. And Rachel suggested that, well, maybe we should offer to pray for the couples who have come. There was only one of the couples there that were from our own church, but we made the offer, and actually 3 couples came forward at the end to receive prayer. And it was a really wonderful opportunity to pray blessing into their lives, to pray peace into their lives, because it was clear that maybe 1 or 2, that wasn't the situation for them. And if we're in these relationships for the long haul, then people will see the way that we live, and there will be opportunities also to speak about what we believe in and what Jesus has done for us. Jesus was realistic. He knew that the 72 wouldn't always receive a positive reaction. And he knows that we won't either. He does say in his command there, "Go, I am sending you out like lambs among wolves." And so we won't always receive a positive reaction. It won't always be a person of peace that we will meet. And that's something of a problem for many of us, because we like to be liked. We hate rejection. And Jesus himself experienced rejection on a grand scale. He talks here about Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. These towns were all on the north coast of the Sea of Galilee. They're known as the Evangelical Triangle, not then, but today in some circles, because this was the region where Jesus did most of his teaching and performed most of his miracles. Capernaum was his center of operations. Matthew, in his account of this same incident, adds on this sentence. He said, Jesus began to denounce the cities in which most of his miracles had been performed, because they did not repent. There was no change. And so in those towns, it seems that there was an awful lot of people of discontent, people who weren't people of peace. And if the people of discontent don't want or didn't want to connect with Jesus directly, we should not be surprised if people like that reject us too. But Jesus reminds us that he who listens to you listens to me. He who rejects you rejects me, and indeed he who rejects me rejects him who sent me, that is, God himself, his Father. And the rejection of God and his messengers is a serious business, because it eventually leads to God's judgment. But that is not our problem. That's God's issue to deal with. Jesus simply calls us to go in faith, to be bold, and to leave the rest to him, even if we suffer rejection. Having heard all that, the 72 might have been nervous, anxious, even downright scared at what they were being called to do, because some of us would feel that way. But then they returned with joy and said, "Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name." And so it sounds like even some of the people of discontent got sorted out and transformed and changed into people of peace. And certainly any kind of positive response that we receive comes with a feel-good factor. If someone commits their life to Jesus because of that conversation that we've had, then we get really excited about it. It brings a sense of joy. When I went out with the games pastors at the Commonwealth Games, one particular group was just with this group because the lady who led our group had a real evangelistic gift. She wasn't afraid to speak to anyone. And in fact, we really didn't get very far because we spoke to everyone as we went along. And in that morning, in the space of just 2 hours, this lady led 3 people to faith in Jesus. It was the only time that happened that week because this woman was just prepared to speak to everyone and to see what God was wanting to do in their lives. And we came back with joy at what God had done that morning. And our joy reflects Jesus' joy because there's rejoicing in heaven over just one sinner who repents. And not only will we experience joy, but we ourselves will also be blessed as we bless others. Jesus concludes the passage saying, "Blessed are the eyes who see what you see." We will be blessed too as we see the same things. So it's not a matter of grim discipline. It's not a matter of doing it because we have to, because Jesus said we should do it, without any enjoyment. We've been created to do this. It will bring deep satisfaction and fulfillment as we partner with the Lord in the work of harvest. And so as Jesus said, got this whole coming week ahead of you. Go, because I am sending you. Shall we pray?